Happy Monday, everyone. This is Martha with Nature Niche. Last week we talked about different bird feed types, and this week I'd like to focus on different bird feeder types and some of the basic information it's important for you to know to be able to safely feed your wild birds in your own backyards. One important thing to consider, especially for winter feeding, is that your feeder is made out of durable materials. So I prefer recycled plastic, wood, metal. You want to be a little leery of glass and brittle plastics for your containers. You want them to be able to hold up and last all winter. It's important that your bird feeder protects the bird seed after you make that investment, and you want it to keep the bird seed dry and also have a good drainage. If water does get in there or snow and then melts, that there's a way for airflow and drainage for the seed to dry back out. You want to make sure your bird feeder is sized, not so big that the seed sits there for a long time and gets stale and moldy, and not so small that you're out there every couple of hours trying to keep it full. And you want it to be easy to inspect and be able to take it down, take it apart, and clean it thoroughly. With winter feeding, the birds' food sources are more scarce, and with feeding in general, we are gathering the birds together in closer proximity than they would be under natural conditions. So there is a risk associated with spreading disease and parasites in between birds. So it's very important that we keep our feeders clean. If you want to learn more about that, check out the Monday with Martha number 12 on our YouTube channel. The other thing you can do is space your feeders apart in your yard. A couple feet apart is recommended if you have different feeder types, and that way sort of minimize lots of bird-to-bird contact. And also make sure that you look at your food and keep it dry and clean. And make sure you're checking your containers and keeping those clean as well. So, a metal or plastic bin, something that's relatively airtight, keeps your seed dry and keeps rodents and insects out is preferable. And then also make sure you're inspecting your feeders to make sure there aren't any broken edges, sharp objects, pieces of wire, things that could cut the birds and cause infections. So those are some general ideas. I also wanted to go over the variety of different feeder types that are available to you. Tray, hopper, tube, niger or thistle, suet, and I'll briefly mention fruit feeders. So one main type of bird feeder are tray feeders. They come in a variety of sizes and shapes. Many are designed to be placed on the ground and slightly elevate seed. So these two are example of ground-based tray feeders, but they can also be set up to hang on poles or posts or from tree limbs, like these open hanging tray feeders. Tray feeders can also be hanging and covered. Here's an example of a window mount version. Here's a small chickadee sized tray feeder with a weather dome on it, and a covered hanging tray feeder, sort of a fly-through design. So lots of different shapes and sizes. They're great for feeding different types of seed, mealworms, fruit, and it's very helpful that the trays have some sort of drainage holes or perforated flooring to keep what you're trying to feed nice and dry for the birds. And those types of feeders tend to attract naturally ground feeding birds like juncos and towhees and sparrows and doves. The second type I wanted to show you are hopper feeders. So they tend to be, fill from the top, gravity fed. The seed falls from the hopper down into a tray. I definitely recommend hopper feeders with perforated flooring as well for good drainage. And depending on the size, they can hold quite a large quantity of seed. So here are examples made out of recycled plastic and cedar. And hopper feeders are designed to either be post or pole mounted or hung from poles or tree branches. And especially the larger sized ones are helpful in attracting bigger bird species like cardinals and jays, grosbeaks, red-winged blackbirds. They need to be, if hung or pole mounted, 5 feet, at least 5 feet off of the ground is recommended. Tube feeders are long and narrow, and they're honestly designed for all sorts of different feed types. So here are some examples with spiral perches. This one is for feeding peanut splits or sunflower seed. This one has metal reinforced ports, which is helpful to help prevent the squirrels from chewing the holes larger. This one's great for feeding seed mixes and black oil sunflower seed. And the spirals are nice because the birds have a very flexible, kind of unlimited different perch points, but a lot of tube feeders will have, set perches as well. And a number of different bird species, hoppers and tube feeders often will attract similar birds. Smaller perches might kind of limit the use by some of the larger bird species. And niger or thistle feeders are specially designed with smaller ports to help conserve the more expensive niger, also called thistle, seed. And those attract smaller birds, finches, pine siskins, chickadees. Again, this is an example with a spiral perch and very small ports, but there are also metal versions with just a finer mesh, and the birds cling on that. There are also thistle sock feeders, which aren't quite as durable as the plexiglass or metal mesh feeders, a little more prone to squirrels getting on them and chewing holes. But the birds easily cling to these as well. And suet feeders, especially in the winter, are a great way to provide high energy food to birds like woodpeckers and nuthatches, chickadees and titmice. So my favorite one at home is this double suet feeder for the larger woodpeckers. This is a tail prop, so they can cling here and they can balance with their tails. And this feeds 2 suet cakes vertically, but they also come in smaller versions. And if you're trying to keep bigger birds like grackles and starlings away from your suet, there are a variety of different sort of woodpecker, clinger types bird species where you put suet cakes in and then the birds have to cling on the bottom to feed. But they can also be as simple as just a single or double metal cage for feeding suet. You can also use this for feeding seed cakes. You could put fruit in here to feed through the winter. So I did want to just briefly mention feeding fruit in the winter. It is an option. We often put up our fruit and jelly and nectar bird feeders for hummingbirds and orioles because they aren't here, at least in Michigan over the winter. but species like waxwings and thrushes and depending on where you are in the country, you might have mockingbirds or American robins. Those berry, and bluebirds up here also like fruit. So those species that are well adapted to eating berries might benefit from, putting fruit out in a tray or a suet cage, or a simple fruit feeder like this where you could hang out oranges still or bunches of grapes. So don't forget about fruit in the winter. It's still a feeding possibility as well. And so I just want to wrap with placement of your feeders. Now that you've seen sort of the whole range of feeders that you can use, it's important to attract a diversity of birds, to put your feeders at different levels, feeding on or near the ground, at sort of shrub height, 5 feet off of the ground, or higher up into trees for birds that naturally like feeding in taller trees. It's important, if you're placing your feeders where you can see them, that you're cognizant of how far from windows you are. It's best to place your feeders within 3 feet of your window, so that the birds, if they do get scared and flush off the feeder, they can't get going very fast before they hit your window, or more than 30 feet away from your window. So think about that, and placing your feeders near cover, shelter objects, brush piles, that sort of thing, within about 10 feet. It's a good kind of compromise distance between easy access to cover and having a hiding place for predators. And just think about those sorts of things as you're choosing what to feed your wild birds and how to feed them. I hope that helped kind of cover the basics of bird feeders. If you have any more questions, please give us a call or come visit us at the store. Thanks.